to live coverage of Eternal Weekend Prague. Today we're back with the top 8 of the Legacy main event. We have two very exciting matches coming up for you. The quarterfinals, we're going to be covering the entire semifinals, both of the matches, and then we'll have the finals match as well. In the meantime, the Vintage main event just started. We're going to be catching up to that slowly, so we're going to be bringing you the Vintage main event as well. I think we're starting from round 2. There are going to be some time walk feature matches, and we're slowly going to be catching up live so we can bring you as much magic as possible and as little downtime as possible. Philip, what did you think yesterday? Was there something some very cool matches, something you didn't expect to see? What do you think of the top 8?
Oh, I'm still thinking about multiple situations, like all the turn 1 Doomsdays. I'm thinking of the Elves versus Cradle match, where you keep blocking top decking, you never know who's going to win. I'm thinking of up the beanstalk into into Mandrels, drawing cards. So just so much happened yesterday, and I'm expecting no less today in the top 8. Every single player had to win 8 rounds out of 10. Very difficult to get there, but exciting to see the highest level of Legacy European play.
All right, let's take a look at the event schedule that we have for you today. So we're starting right now, 11 a.m. local time, with the top 8. After that, like we mentioned, we're going to follow up with the Vintage Swiss into the Vintage top 8. We can take a look at the event structure very quickly. So Legacy had 10 rounds of Swiss. It was a very, very long day. This is the reason why we have the top 8 playing on Sunday morning. Pretty usual stuff, 8 players in the top 8. Whoever finished higher in the standings in the Swiss gets to play first. Vintage, a little bit smaller of a tournament. Legacy had about 750 players, I believe. Vintage has three digits as well. Equals 7 rounds of Swiss, top 8, pretty much the same thing. We could take a look at the prizes now. The coolest thing about these events is that Wizards make these special promo cards. I think in the past there was a Ponder, believe it was a Gush. We have a Dragon's Rage Channeler promo for the top 8 of the Legacy main event. Each of the top 8 players gets one of those cards, and the winner actually gets a special Force of Will art on this very big oversized card. I think there are other oversized cards as well for the 2nd through 4th place. I think one of them is a Wormcoil Engine. I don't remember the other 2 cards, but top 4 gets an oversized card. Top 1, the first person that wins gets the Force of Will, which is probably the coolest prize at the event. But in Vintage, we have an even cooler one, which is an oversized Black Lotus with a special art. So let's take a look at the standings. A lot of people were asking, how did their favorite players do yesterday? What was the record required to make it into the top 8? So this is the standings after the Swiss. Mark Tobias, the one of the world's most famous combo player that just always shows up to a tournament playing a combo deck. 9-1 first place after the Swiss with his Doomsday deck. We have a pretty diverse metagame overall, and if you look at the top 8, I think it's 8 different decks: Doomsday, Cradle Control, Rakdos Scam, Grixis Delver, Temur Cascade, Boros Initiative, and Temur Midrange. So pretty diverse metagame. Anything that stands out to you, Philip?
Yeah, so actually, if you extend that into other places in the standings, we've got Lands, Death Shadow, Mono Black, so Painter even. So the whole top 6 is pretty diverse, I would say. And just a couple of decks have double copies. Now we're looking at an X3 metagame, so 7 and 3 in this case. Grixis Delver, Dimir Scam, Doomsday. So all top 3 spots taken by blue decks.
Yeah, blue, in these Eternal 4 formats, you really want to be on a deck featuring Force of Will. You are either trying to do something extremely powerful yourself, or you are trying to defend yourself from that, or you're playing both, which, the case of Mark Tobias' deck, for example, he is playing Doomsday with Force of Will, so he is trying to do something unfair, but also protect himself from all the shenanigans. So this was the X3 metagame. Let's take a look at how this changes when we go into the X2 and metagame. Still very similar, right?
Yeah, Grixis Delver at the very top still. But then we skip those two blue decks into Boros Initiative and Land. So this is where these non-blue decks start to shine, it seems. And only then we've got Storm and then Critical Trust, another non-blue deck. So it seems like blue is really good at being consistent. Maybe it's more difficult to spike a tournament with it.
Yeah, and Legacy is one of those formats. I think it's very similar to Modern, where I think it's better to just specialize on one deck and make sure you really understand how the deck plays out, how it works, like how to sequence your cards properly, and you understand every matchup, how to sideboard, what role you should be trying to take in that matchup. And that's why we also see a lot of players consistently doing well with the same deck, because it's usually a better idea to just practice one deck a lot, and practice makes perfect, rather than try to change your deck every other week. All right, let's take a look at the top 8 bracket now. So first question that a lot of people are going to have is, why is Elliot Busaw not on the list? So what ended up happening yesterday is, in the final moments of Elliot's game in the last round, he ended up conceding his match because he really wanted to play the Vintage event. So you love to see the dedication. That's why Elliot is not here. And we're going to be featuring, I think, Julian playing against John Luca. That's going to be the match number 1. So Temur Delver against Temur Midrange. And I think our backup feature match was, I believe, Mark Tobias playing against Martin Pelican. The Doomsday Combo playing against Ragadus Scam. So I believe we're ready to start with the first match.
Yeah, so we've got Temur versus Temur, but they are actually pretty different. So Temur Delver is a deck with the actual card, Delver of Secrets, Questing Druid, some lightning bolts, cantrips, so everything you would normally expect. Classic Wasteland deck that wants to be disruptive. And when you say Temur Midrange, it's even difficult to try to create a deck list in your head. What could that entail? But in practice, you just drop the Delvers and you add Ethereal Forager as your top end of choice, in addition to Murktide, and then you add up the Beanstalk for the juicy card draw. And I would have to say that, in a standoff, face to face, Temur versus Temur, historically, Martin, the deck that does a similar thing but is a bit bigger has been advantaged. So maybe we'll see the same dynamic here.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how Questing Druid does. Lately in Legacy, when you were talking about Delver, most people would imagine a Grixis Delver deck. Now a lot of people are experimenting with Questing Druid, and we do see 2 different Questing Druid decks here in the top 8 playing against each other.
Yes, I'm really curious how that shakes out. So Julian might want to approach it from a very aggressive angle. So like have turn 1 Channel or turn 1 Delver to be able to exemplify his own main plan. Because if he decides to play long, he just walks into what Gianluca wants to do in the first place. So, I would like to see Delver of Secrets backed up by Daze, riding it to town. But then from Gianluca's side, I'm looking not for the Forager up the Beanstalk openings, but rather, double bolt to contain early aggression. So we'll see how that matches up, actually.
Well, Julian actually has double bolt in his opening hand. And does the dynamic of this matchup, is there something different about it than, when you look at your opening hand against an unknown opponent? In Legacy, I think usually, the card I want to see in my opening hand is Force of Will. If my opponent is on some kind of combo deck, if they're playing Doomsday, if they're playing Storm, I want to protect myself. Now in the top 8, both players know their opponent's deck list. How does that change? Is Force of Will a card you want to see in this matchup? Is this perhaps, does the dynamic change a little bit? Is Force of Will not that great? How does it work?
Oh, yeah, that's a very good question. So typically I wouldn't want to see Force of Will in my hand because it will be an attrition war largely. So they will be trading 1 for 1, and you do not want to use Force of Will on like a lightning bolt, 2 for 1 yourself. However, if there is a person with a Force of Will in hand, happily, I think it would be Julian, to protect his threat and actually ride it to victory, making the cards irrelevant because he actually wants to close the game. And it's interesting play from Gianluca. He just wastelands the opponent despite the fact that he is basically behind, right? Because of Channeler. Now, finally here, Julian can follow up with Tropical Island into Ponder. But cannot Lightning Bolt. But yeah, Ponder is pretty decent.
Yeah, Wasteland is you typically want to press your advantage when you're ahead. Wastelanding the opponent on the draw when they already have a threat in play is not ideal.
Yeah.
But if that's that seems like the only uh, play that Gianluca had available to him in the first turn. I think this feels great for Julian. He just says, okay, well, I'm gonna keep drawing cards. I'm gonna keep making my Dragon Race Chandler bigger, and I'm gonna start attacking. This is gonna make my lightning bolts better. It's gonna make my counter spells better too.
Yeah, in this particular case, thanks to ditching DRC and playing Ponder, he has an instant away, and he's got Lightning Bolt. So, or an artifact right
Wow.
now, actually. So it's basically a flip Delver now, isn't he?
Yeah, there's a
Nice.
daze in Julian's hand, so that wasteland was actually perfect for Julian because it's gonna make his daze even better now. And he's gonna be
Wow.
able to protect the Dragon's Race Chandler, who's
Yeah.
gonna be able to attack for 3 right away, puts Gianluca to 17.
Yeah, that's exactly the opening you want to see. He even top decks a Scalding Tarn with another Delver, Daze a Bolt in hand. Yeah, what a way to press the advantage. Portent is the top deck. Actually, I don't see Daze. So there
Okay,
is a way, maybe.
maybe I saw the card wrong. Portent is an interesting one. Usually you see these decks playing Ponder and Brainstorm as the first 2 card selection pieces you put in most blue decks. But Julian is actually running a couple copies of Portent. Can you explain that? Does he just want to have access to more card selection spells? Did he just want to have an extra sorcery spell in his deck for his Chandler? What's the logic behind that?
Yeah, so usually when you want to add additional cantrips in addition to Brainstorm and Ponder, you're thinking of Preordain. Now, Portent is an interesting one. So it has 2 uses. First of all, you can target the opponent. So, for example, mess up their Doomsday pile, potentially. And the second use is that you can maybe play around Narset, if that's something you're afraid of, right? You target the opponent, you have a delayed draw, and you don't walk into that restriction. So there are a couple of extra uses. It's also information, right? In addition to all of that, because you know what the opponent is cooking, be it on turn 1, and you know their strategy, or later in the game, you know the sequence of draws for them is. Maybe if it's like a top deck war, you know exactly the next 3 cards they will be drawing. So yeah, it's a decent card that used to see a lot of play in Miracles, but that was some time ago. And Portent is played, Surveil on the stack.
All right, I think we managed to make the melee lists public now. If you go to MTG Melee, you check the Legacy main event. I could maybe link to that later on, or maybe one of the comments in the chat is going to be able to give you that link. The list should be public. We couldn't make them public yesterday because the event is closed deck lists. But now that the top 8 is being played, obviously all the players have access to each other's deck list. So now you can take a look at them as well. Meanwhile, Julian is still getting in there with the channeler. 1 mana 3/3 flyer, pretty solid deal. Gianluca hasn't been able to really do much outside of playing 1 Force of Will and that early Wasteland, which set him back probably even more than Julian.
Yeah, because Julian has got double land, a threat that's already bashing in for 3, 4 turn clock, and Gianluca doesn't have nothing yet. I can see double Brainstorm, Druid, and a couple of lands, but it doesn't affect the immediate situation, so he might have to try to Brainstorm into some kind of a removal spell, and Brainstorm he does.
Yeah, I think Gianluca is definitely looking for a Lightning Bolt here. Playing Questing Druid on the table here seems reasonable, but it's just a 1/1. It would die immediately to a Lightning Bolt from Julian, so Gianluca decides against that. Goes with the card selection spell, looking for that Brainstorm, looking for that Lightning Bolt, or any other way to try to stop the bleeding. Is it a Wasteland?
Wow!
That's interesting.
Yeah, so not only did he Brainstorm himself, he didn't Brainstorm again either. So he still doesn't have any removal spell. He's not digging further. And wow, what's going on here? Murktide Regent.
That's a big Murktide, yeah.
That is a big Murktide indeed, and there is no counterspell, so Gianluca might Brainstorm into a Force of Will. Now he knows the top card, which isn't that. So he needs to count on the second and third card from the top.
Yeah, I was already getting ready for Vintage and writing down some notes, and I was like, okay, well, it's such a big advantage to play first in Vintage, right? Because of all the fast mana, some of the lock pieces in the shop stacks. But it looks like we picked a matchup where it's possibly even better to be on the play because you are playing a Daze deck, you are playing a Wasteland deck, so being on the play and having the first threat in play is such a big advantage in this matchup. And I think it exactly shows in the game here where Gianluca is just behind the whole match. His Wastelands are not effective. They're actually kind of working against him, and he also just is not able to find any removal.
Yeah, and he keeps the Brainstorm on top, Lorien revealed. So what he could have done is put 2 cards on top, Lorien in hand, and an upkeep shuffled. But I think what he wants to do is deploy a Murktide right now, and his own Murktide will be a 6/6. So he's just big enough to be able to profitably block the opposing Murktide. But as you and I know, Martin, Julian has double bolt in hand. So Julian doesn't know it, but just attacking with both, double bolting the opponent should just be enough.
Yeah, this is an interesting situation. If you attack and double bolt, that would normally be enough. But this is a format where players have access to cards like Force of Will. They have access to cards like Force of Negation. So, do you want to go for it? Do you want to try to chump attack your Murktide into the bigger one, deal 3 in the process, then try to play 2 Lightning Bolts? What if it doesn't resolve? Then you don't have anything else left over. It's 1 creature against 1. Maybe Gianluca can turn the game around. Do you try to Lightning Bolt to double bolt the Murktide instead? What's going to be the play? It looks like Julian starts by doing that in his upkeep to get the Surveil trigger from his Dragon's Red Chandler, which is a great play. Looks like he kept the card on top, plays another bolt face before attacking, and that's a great play because this way he knows if the bolts are going to resolve, he knows if the winning play is going to work, and then he can safely attack. So great play by Julian there, realizing that there's no need for me to attack first and then see whether you have the force or not, and he is up a game now.
Yeah, that was a heads-up sequencing situation, right? We discussed multiple ways how he could approach this, and he chose the best one, which is sometimes counterintuitive, right? Because when you have instants, you're typically not incentivized to play them upkeep, then take the draw, and then play the main phase to see how the combat is going to play out. So that's a very interesting case here in this matchup. Temur Delver taking the first game. And it kept the dynamic that I mentioned. You want to be aggressive. You want to press the advantage until the opponent establishes their up the beanstalk.
Yeah,
that happened.
Great play by Julian there. The whole match, I think Gianluca actually even helped Julian a little bit. I think by wastelanding the mana there to set them both back. With Julian being the first one to deploy the threat, that ended up working really well for him. So, what do you think about the sideboards here? Anything that stands out? I know we discussed counterbalance yesterday. There are obviously cards like Ponder and Portent and Brainstorm to try to manipulate the top cards of your library. But just for one turn, you don't have a card like Sensei's Divining Top. Is this a card that comes in this match?
It could, but the density of 2 drops is a bit higher in Temur Midrange, so you might not be able to get full value because there'll be these up the beanstalks, Loriens, Murktides, Ethereal Foragers. So I think it might be tricky. But what I'm looking at, and it might be a bit cheesy, is these 2 juicy copies of Blood Moon because the opponent has no basic lands in the deck. Not even a single one, not even an island. So if that Blood Moon comes down, Temur Midrange is in trouble.
Is that a card you would bring in, though? Making something costing 3 mana in a matchup where both players have cards like Daze and Wasteland? Is that something that maybe changes that?
So first of all, I would expect some number of forces to come out, which would make Blood Moon safer. And the opponent might actually have all the forces when they know there is a Blood Moon. But if there is a Blood Moon, there is no third game to bring FOVs back 4. So that's one thing. And second thing, Temur Midrange has got this up the beanstalk plan that if it gets going, Julian might have trouble contesting actually in like a fair fight. So he might need to have an unfair fight to go alongside with it.
Speaking of up the beanstalk, is that something? How important do you think it is in this match? This is a very tempo-oriented match. It's a match where both players have cards like Daze. They have cards like Wasteland. Do you still want to keep that in your deck? Is that a play or draw thing? How do you think that changes the matchup?
I think I want this in my deck because I want to deploy it on turn 2, at least one copy, and then just never worry about it, in the next few turns. And then just play a Murktide, draw a card, Ethereal Forager, draw a card. So I think I like it. You might trim a couple of copies. On the play, I would keep all of them. Because if you walk into a daze, then you've got 2 lands, opponent has 0. So yeah, on the play, certainly keeping all of them. And yeah, there was a question about whether Julian knows there are no basics for Temur Midrange, and yes, he does. So this is what makes Blood Moon so tempting. You know the opponent has no way of dealing with it, and Temur Midrange has barely any way of contesting a resolved Blood Moon. Actually, if any.
Looks like we are ready for game number 2. Gianluca looking at a decent opener of 7 cards. Julian, double Wasteland on the draw. Yeah, it looks like both players ended up with the Wasteland draws on the draw here. Is Julian going to keep this? 3 lands, 2 of them are Wastelands. He does have a 1-drop, a Lightning Bolt. So he does have a threat and an answer. So
we actually could see a completely mirrored situation. We do, because last game it was Volk Channeler, Wasteland on the draw. We've got, and I think they're laughing about it as well. It's literally the same situation flipped.
Yeah, I think with the Wastelands, you're just hoping that you mana screw the opponent, right? Because these decks typically play sometimes 16, 17, 18 lands, 4 of which usually happen to be Wastelands. So there is usually 14, sometimes 13 mana sources, sometimes even 12. So by Julian using the Wasteland here, or Gianluca in the first game, they're just hoping you don't have more lands. Obviously, sometimes it backfires. If your hand is 2 more lands, you are happy about the opponent using the Wasteland there because you are the one pressuring the opponent and the one using your mana first.
Yeah, and now we see another land, no crackage there, playing around potential Wasteland, also holding it up for maybe a Brainstorm. Attack just for 1, so Gianluca has got a threat, but attacking for 1 isn't a big deal. He's not taking advantage of the Surveil because of no cantrip. So as Julian, I wouldn't be too scared of what's happening now. So yeah, so now we're fetching, probably end step Lightning Bolt. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting that Julian chose to Wasteland turn 1 rather than kill the Channeler with the Lightning Bolt.
Immediately,
that tells you a lot about the matchup, right? Trying to mana screw the opponent, when that works out, it's going to be such a big advantage for you if the opponent can't play its spells at all. If you use the Lightning Bolt there on turn 1, the Channeler is going to die, but your opponent still has the land. They can use it to play Brainstorm or Ponder, try to find more lands. So Julian goes for the play that has a higher ceiling, but if it doesn't work out, the extra turn that Gianluca gets might be the difference between winning and losing.
That is true. And now Julian is looking at a possible maybe turn to counterbalance, maybe double Channeler, because I think he has 2, or double Pyroblast. No, he's double Channeler, yeah. Double Channeler and Pyroblast. So he could deploy double Channeler or play 1 Channeler, hold up, Blast. So there are 3 possible plays here. Actually, there's one more, which is play Channeler, hold up, Wasteland, or actually one more, Pyroblast hold up with Wasteland hold up. So there are like 6 possible plays for Julian here.
Wow, okay, this is such a different game. Both players just playing lands, looking at each other, not resolving any threats. Now the Wastelands might get even better. Now nothing is in play.
That is interesting.
With the Wasteland activation on the stack, Julian decides to crack that Scalding Tarn.
Another Volk. This is such a weird game, but I love it.
I'm going to take a quick look at the deck list here. How many sources of each color both players actually have? There's 1 Tropical Island in Julian's deck. That's the only green source, actually.
Yeah, now a powerful response to Wasteland. Questing Druid, which is a card from Wilds of Eldraine with an adventure, which seeks the beast, basically playing like a Reckless Impulse, card advantage spell, which replaces essentially Expressive Iteration. And then later in the game, that 1 Tropical Island that you've mentioned can be used to deploy it as a threat and just grow it. So basically, when you've got Expressive Iteration with a threat attached, Yeah, it's a decent card. And yeah, he found a threat into a land. That's perfect. So he can now go like, channeler, hold up, pyroblast.
All right, Julian goes with the free land from the Seek the Beast spell, plays a channeler, corrects a fetch land. No response from John Luca just yet. He is sitting on a pyroblast. I believe there's a force of will in his hand as well. It's a very reactive hand. Not really what you want to see. You want to be the one playing threats, pressing the advantage, using the card draw spells while you're triggering your Dragon's Ray Channeler, looking at more cards, filling your graveyard to prepare for that Murktide Regent.
Okay, so now we've got this lightning bolt trying to kill the channeler, but again, it's still trading 1-for-1. So far in this game, Julian is up 2 cards, it seems, right? Because he was on the draw, plus he drew it into 2 cards. So in the card economy department, he's up by 2. We'll see if that's going to matter at all.
Yeah, John Luca's hand's super active. He does have another Wasteland. At this point, it might be tempting to try to save it for that Tropical Island, knowing that Julian only has 1 source of green in his entire deck. Could certainly play a role here. If you get him off of that Tropical Island, he would not be able to cast any more Questing Druids.
Oh, okay, Days. That's okay. But now, we talk that Julian is ahead on cards, but now he might even be ahead on time, on tempo in the game, which would be a really good position for him. Okay, so second Volk down. There are 2 more Volks and 1 Trop, and Gianluca knows that. Yeah, but full hand for Julian. Deploy the land drop, play another channeler, pass.
There's a counterbalance in Julian's hand. I still have yet to see a counterbalance
Do anything
something relevant in this tournament. So I'm still a doubter. But as you mentioned, maybe this is not the perfect matchup for counterbalance. Also, if your opponents are fighting over your mana with wastelands, sometimes it could be hard to even cast it.
So, if I was a viewer and I went to the toilet, came back, I think I would think it's the same turn over and over again, because we see again channeler play, something happens, channeler play, something happens, and they keep having like 1 or 2 lands in play.
So Julian is down to 1 tropical island and 1 volcanic island in his deck as mana-producing lands. There are a lot of fetch lands. He also does have wastelands.
Oh my god, it's the same thing. Play channeler, okay, Volk, kill it. That's exactly the same thing. There is a daze, but then you would have to you'd just force the opponent to fetch, and they would just fetch. So that doesn't accomplish much. This game might come down to actual mana sources in the deck. Now, there are 4 possible wastelands versus Temur Delver, 6 possible mana sources. So even when everything trades out, Julian will have 2 mana sources.
Yeah, I think Julian is in a position where he's considering whether he should fight over this Unholy Heat, realizing I might not get to cast too many more spells this game. Do I want to force back, try to find over that Unholy Heat, and use my Dragon's Ray Channeler as a threat to try to press my opponent?
Yeah, Delver, no land drop. Gianluca, no land drop, pass.
Wow.
Flip into Ponder. That's probably the best flip, because you can now find a land. If you actually found a land, that would be worse, because you wouldn't flip the Delver. Yeah, he might also hold up Pyroblast.
Delver attacks for 3. There's the Ponder. Julian looking for another land drop. I don't think he found it. I see 2 more copies of Ponder and a Lightning Bolt. I think that's going to be a shuffle. Yeah, he definitely wants to try to find another land drop.
Oh my god! Yeah, and what we would like to see is a fetch land and holding up Pyroblast, because if we Pyroblast a potential Murktide Regent, that would be huge.
Julian's hand is pretty stacked. I see a Pyroblast, I see a Daze, Counterbalance,
and Bolt.
and a lightning bolt. I think Gianluca is still sitting on that force of will. Do you generally want to save force of will to try to fight over the big cards like Murktide Regent?
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe like a counter war to counter back. But yeah, generally, you want to counter the thing you otherwise can't really remove. So Murktide Regent is a perfect example. I think it's Pyroclasm. What's that?
Is that that looks a lot like Pyroclasm in Gianluca's hand. I
The
think
old art, right? Oh, it is
yeah.
Pyroclasm actually.
I think he has 2 forces and a Pyroblast. Decides to not fight the Delver just yet. Perhaps wants to
Like
lure
end step
Julian
kill it, maybe?
into deploying another threat.
Yeah, that's another way. Yeah, for example, Julian might play Droid and Pass, and then you Pyroclasm both. This is a wild game. Yeah, I love it. There's so much going on.
Yeah, maybe Gianluca also doesn't want to expose his second land to potentially get wastelanded.
Okay, so attacks, passes the turn. No Pyroblast on the end step on the drawn. Because now, actually, if there is a Pyroclasm, it will walk straight into a Daze. Because actually, Gianluca has seen 0 Dazes from Julian so far. Oh, there is a Wasteland. There is another Wasteland. No.
Yeah, Dace is certainly a card you have to respect in this situation. Gianluca did get his 3rd land, so maybe next turn he could try to play the Pyroclasm, play around Dace, get rid of the Delver. But at some point you have to start fighting over it, because the lower your life total is, the more effective are your opponent's lightning bolts.
Okay, end step Brainstorm. Beautiful Beta Island drawn alongside, I think, a Daze that was important.
Lots of card selection spells for Julian. What is he looking for now? Is he just looking for some counters to try to fight over the Delver? And as long as it survives, Gianluca is going to be on a 4-turn clock, taking into consideration that probably one of those fetch lands is going to have to be cracked. That would put him to 12.
Yeah, that's one. I think I would also like a green source to deploy that Druid, because that's essentially a free threat, because it's waiting anyways. So I would really like a green source. Unless he really wants to wait it out until he has seen most Wastelands, or even all of them. So now putting back, I think there was an island as one of the cards put back. The order of the cards also is important, because you're going to redraw one of them. And he decides to redraw, you have no idea what. Attack you for 3. Land counterbalance. So there is that counterbalance that could come in handy.
Is Gianluca going to fight over that? Yeah, this is interesting. He doesn't have any consistent ways to manipulate the top card of his deck, but it's still just the looming threat of, well, what if you do reveal the same mana cost? I don't want to get my spells countered for free.
Yeah.
Does Gianluca fight over this?
Okay, I think we'll actually see Volk into Pyroblast on the stack, so this could be it, but this is one fewer Pyroblast that doesn't go after Delver.
Yeah, that's the thing. You can use Pyroblast here to try to deal with the counterbalance, but then the cards you have left in your hand are 2 forces and a Pyroclasm. If you want to fight over the counterbalance with a force, that would leave you with 2 different cards that could deal with the Delver.
Yeah, with our perfect info, we know that if Gianluca makes a land drop, then that Pyroclasm will always resolve, because there is double Daze in Julian's hand. Unless he double Dazes now, for example. So there are multiple options. There is also a Lightning Bolt in hand, just waiting until Gianluca goes down on his life total. And there is a Daze. Pick up a basic island. Forcing Gianluca also to fetch. We know that there was a Wasteland in the top few cards from a previous cantrip.
Yeah, I think the cards Gianluca are looking for probably do not include Wasteland anymore. I think right now he's looking for Lightning Bolts. He's looking for some threats of his own. He wants to draw into a Murktide or something proactive rather than something that would let him fight over his opponent mana.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's Temur Midrange and Up the Beanstalk deck, and we haven't seen any Up the Beanstalk shenanigans. So now we see the second days gets Force of Willed. So now the end result is that counterbalance is countered. Julian passes the turn, has Lightning Bolt up, and Gianluca can just play Pyroclasm, and we're back square one. But I think Gianluca is the one who has better top decks between Up the Beanstalk, Murktide, and Ethereal Forager. So yeah, I like the mid-range side here. I really do. So let's see what the draw is.
Julian gave it a proper thought, perhaps signaling that he also might be sitting on a Force of Will, but he was unwilling to fight over the counterbalance there, perhaps rather deciding to protect his Delver. But now that the Pyroclasm resolved, I think that should signal to Gianluca that there is no way Julian could fight over that.
Volk, Portent, myself, and let's see. Mishra's Bobble, Days Fetch. I think we're not really happy with these cards. Let's shuffle. This is a really exciting. This is one of the better matches we've seen, honestly.
Yeah, there's so much interaction in these decks on top of Wastelands. You have to consistently play around Dazes to not get your big cards countered that way. Imagine trying to play a Force of Will 2-for-1 yourself, and your opponent plays a Daze.
Yeah,
returns
exactly.
a land to their hand and counters your Force. So lots of cards to play around, lots of things to take into consideration. Your mana base. We know Julian has only a tropical island left in his deck as the last producing land. Lots of stuff you have to play around, lots of stuff you have to take into consideration.
Yeah, there was a bolt available, but he opted not to. He might be going with Druid now into bolt channel and get a counter. And then if Gianluca actually top decks Murktide or Ethereal Forager, he's got the Pyroblast ready in hand. So I think the advantage bar has flipped to the left now. Yes. Yeah. Wilds of Eldraine. Let's go. In response, Wilds of Eldraine, Seek the Beast, trigger Surveil. Wow.
Yeah, I think the second Julian declares that he's going to use the fetch land to actually look through his deck, I think we know that he is going to find that tropical island. That's going to be his one turn of having green mana for sure. So this is the turn when he finally gets to decide to deploy that questing druid. But this is also his only green source in the deck. So if now Gianluca ever draws a wasteland to deal with that tropical island, there will be no more questing druids.
Yeah, now we will have a proper standoff of double druid. In response to your druid, we might kill the DRC or just wait it out. And also, we're almost watching a mirror. Druid, double Volk, single tropical island. It's almost a complete mirror. But yeah, the devil's in the detail.
So this is a strange legacy deck. This is a strange legacy match with 2 cards actually on an adventure at the moment.
Difficult spot for the players. Yes, and now we see Seek the Beast at a Ponder. So now you could Seek again using the previous Seek and actually proper chain the cards there.
I think Julian still has a Pyroblast in his hand. He does have multiple cards in hand, though. I think that's 4 cards in hand. And given that he was thinking about that counter war when the counterbalance wasn't the stack, but he wasn't fighting over that Pyroclasm, does that signal anything? Can you take something away from that play?
So we know that Julian could not have fought over Pyroclasm because Pyroblast can't help there. So if Pyroclasm resolved, I would, as Gianluca, think there is no Force of Will, there is no Daze. But yeah, there very much could be a Red Blast or Pyroblast. Ponta put a counter.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how much you can deduce from plays here without really, seeing your opponent's hand. But the way the counter wars happen. Yeah, there's the Pyroblast. So
On Ponder? Okay. That is very aggressive. Like when you're cashing in a Pyroblast. Oh my god. Now we've got double trigger after that days. Woof. That's a powerful sequence from Gianluca. I think he's firmly ahead now. Yeah, these days is absolutely brutal. Now, double Brainstorm Wasteland. Yeah, this game is insane. This is insane. I think both players will happily rewatch this after they come back home to see how it looked from the other side of the table. But yeah, I feel super happy that we got to see such a great game. 3-3 Druid. I think 3-3 DRC as well.
yeah, this is as interactive as it gets for Legacy. When it comes to two creature decks playing against each other.
Yeah. And so
So
right now,
is Gianluca, does he have the advantage right now, given that he is able to attack with a flyer? The questing druids are sort of keeping each other's in check. Julian has more cards in hand though. Plays a ponder, sees another counterbalance. I think right now he's going to be looking for answers or bigger threats rather than a utility card like that. So I think the cards he's looking for are Murktide Regent, other card selection spells, Brainstorm plus Fetch Land, something along those lines. Although keep in mind that Fetch Lands right now only shuffle your deck. They do not actually provide you with a land that can produce mana.
yeah, I think what Julian has to think about is that other druid coming down eventually. So Gianluca is ahead on two threats. One is actually in play, and the other is going to be coming down. Yeah, and a lot has to be going through their heads. Because, for example, I think you can deduce that Gianluca has no cantrips because he would have played them. So he probably has either gas or a blank. Okay, land. Murktide. Okay. That's exactly what we wanted to see. This might be a way to flip this game, because if Gianluca is winning on cards with these additional threats and stuff, having a threat that actually one-shots the opponent is the way to go.
Wow, there's a Murktide.
Yeah, and there could be one interesting trick that you could do as Gianluca, because DRC has to attack, right? But what he could do is maybe like draw his own Forager or Murktide, deprive himself of Delirium, and then turn it back on the second main phase, potentially, to have a flyer, but not attack.
Brainstorm is being cast in response to the Murktide as the last card in Gianluca's hand, I believe. There is a Dragon's Rage Chandler trigger on the stack, a Questing Druid trigger on the stack. Yeah, I think Gianluca has so many cards in the graveyard that turning off Delirium might be hard, although with a Murktide on top, that could certainly happen.
Yeah, this Brainstorm triggers DRC and Questing Druid, but doesn't actually put Gianluca up on cards. He's going to look at 3, put 2 back, even if he finds days that doesn't accomplish anything. So the timing is interesting.
All right, here's an interesting judge question. Can you overdelve when you are using delve to cast your card, in this case a Murktide, whatever, Treasure Cruise? Can you exile more cards than just the required amount of mana?
The answer is you wish you could, but you can't. You would happily overdelve everything and just have a 30-30 Murktide and fling the opponent to death. But yeah, sadly you cannot. A very similar weird questions came up with Mox Opal in the KCI days, where you were thinking like, what does 0 cost actually mean?
Right. So in the meantime, Julian actually puts Gianluca to 2 with the attack of that Questing Druid. And as you mentioned, the clause on Dragon's Rage Chandler requires it to attack right now.
Okay, we've got some judge double checking. Maybe it's about the order of the triggers or. Oh, okay. It might be that he didn't announce that he would be putting a counter. He just surveilled and then put a counter instead of saying, I will survey first and then put a counter. I think this might be the question. So basically, do you need to pre-announce all the triggers and then do them? Or can you just do them one by one without pre-announcing?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question is as it's not a visible thing. So as long as you acknowledge the trigger in the time frame when it could still be on the stack, then you could resolve the trigger.
Yeah, I think there was a phrase that you need to show your awareness of the trigger the last moment it would be relevant in.
Yeah, also these rules keep changing. In the past, there were a couple of years where you didn't have to help your opponents remember their triggers. If they did not announce their triggers, then it wouldn't happen. Then there was a change in the rules thanks to the mechanic, thanks to Exalted, when your creatures were attacking.
Oh yeah,
they were getting
classic.
bigger,
Yeah.
so that they changed the rules again, so that you wouldn't have to announce that until it was relevant. So it's usually good to ask about how these things work if you are not sure.
Yeah, and looking at Gianluca's hand, I think he's actually dead a couple of ways because he does have Petty Theft to get rid of Murktide, but there is a Bolt in Julian's hand. Gianluca also can't attack with Druid, which means that when Julian plays a couple of spells, his Druid is going to be bigger. So an interesting spot, which might still result in Julian taking it down, but because I'm not sure if I remember correctly, but this might be the same Bolt that we saw in the opening hand 20 turns ago. Like that exact same copy of Lightning Bolt, just waiting for its moment to shine.
And remember, the top 4 does get the oversized card. The winner gets a special art of Force of Will on an oversized card, but the entire top 4 gets one of the big cards. One of them is a Wormcoil Engine. I'll try to figure out exactly what the other 2 are.
Okay, and it is Petty Theft on Murktide. I mean, from Gianluca's perspective, he knows that this Murktide can be redeployed. Yes, and Lightning Bolt is shown, shake of the hand, and Julian takes it down.
If you are Gianluca here, you feel like, well, so much work, I had to do so many things on my own turn only for you to show me the Lightning Bolt. But obviously, if you're Julian there, you're not going to expose your hand to give your opponent free information. So yeah, Julian casts the Lightning Bolt, takes game number 2, wins his quarterfinal match, and moves on to the semis. I think that was that is going to be it for the quarterfinals. Do we have any other backup quarterfinals here? I think we do have the match between Mark Tobias playing Doomsday against let me pull that up real quick, against the Rakdos Scam, which, if I'm correctly looking at the deck list, is not actually Rakdos Scam. That just looks like a normal Reanimate deck.
So it's something between, because it also plays triple Urza Saga for some reason. So yeah. So it's an Urza Scam reanimated deck with 3 sagas. It has Liliana of the Veil, a single Hogak and a Traxa, a Voidwalker Bowmaster, Grief. Okay. So it has both the Scam angle and the reanimated angle and Urza Saga angle for Currency Converter, which is the only fetchable card from Urza Saga, and it says that whenever you discard a card, which should be plenty in this deck, exile that card from your graveyard. You can draw and discard, and for a single tap, put a card exiled with Currency Converter into your graveyard. If it's a land, create a treasure. If it's a non-land, create a rogue token. So this is as brewest as it gets. Honestly,
this is a very interesting deck. Let's take a look at the other deck. He is playing against Mark Tobias. We've seen him multiple times in the feature match area yesterday. He is playing the Doomsday combo, the deck you said you would play yourself if you were playing this tournament. What is interesting about this deck?
Yeah, this list in particular is very interesting because it plays no discard main deck. It plays triple Veil. triple Teferi Time Raveler, and triple the One Ring. And we have seen Mark even go like turn one, the One Ring, and follow it up with the kill on that very same turn with the protection active. So very interesting list. Also, sideboard shieldred, prismatic ending, a ton of interaction. And he's crushing it because he finished with 9-1.
Yeah, Veil of Summer has been incredible for Mark yesterday. We saw a match where his Storm opponent played a Thoughtseize before he was about to combo. Mark played a Veil of Summer, which grants him hexproof, not just for the Thoughtseize, but for the rest of the turn. So the opponent not only did get his Thoughtseize countered, but also just couldn't combo off anymore because his Tendrils wouldn't do anything. So Veil of Summer, an incredible card for Mark so far this weekend. It looks like we're joining the game with Mark up a game, but Martin with an Atraxa in play. How do you think this matchup usually goes? Like, who do you think should have the advantage? What are the reasons why that particular player is advantaged?
Yeah, so you're putting a lot of stress on the word usually here because we're watching Teferi, the One Ring Doomsday versus Atraxa Scam, which is a very interesting head-to-head matchup. So first of all, I really like the Veils that Mark has in this matchup. On top of that, the One Ring pulls a lot of weight when your combo is disrupted. So that actually speaks a lot because these Doomsday decks sometimes side into Murktide Regent, let's say, post-board, to be able to bolster their plan B. However, in this case, Mark has an already super solid plan B that he might want to go to in the first place. So there are some ways. However, Martin then, on the flip side, when he doesn't have the reanimated draw, he might be able to have the Grim offense that strips Marks of resources. This discards the Doomsday and the One Ring, and Mark is left with a couple of cantrips and rituals. So yeah, I think it's really interesting how it could possibly go, but difficult to predict. 3 mana being tapped, Teferi Time Raveler. Classic pairing. Teferi, the One Ring.
Yeah, if you thought you would escape Ragda Scam by moving from Modern to watching a Legacy event, we have unfortunately some bad news for you. Ragda Scam is everywhere. No, I'm just kidding. It looks like Martin is just playing a Brood, and he just happened to do very well in this event. But Ragda Scam is not a deck you typically play against in Legacy.
Yeah, and likewise, you're not typically playing against Doomsday Teferi, the One Ring deck, because Teferi and the One Ring is also something that you would typically see in Modern. There is one neat trick that Mark could do down the line. So Teferi bounce you the One Ring, replay it, and gain protection again. So that's one thing he could do. It also resets the counters, so it makes sure he doesn't die to the damage. But he's at a healthy 18, so I wouldn't be really afraid. But yeah, Mark is just playing something different, it seems. Like one time he wins on turn 1 with Doomsday. The other, he just plays like a slow, blue-eyed-ish control deck, just waiting for the perfect opportunity to combo off.
Yeah, one interesting thing you mentioned yesterday was that Mark is only running 15 lands.
Yeah.
Which is pretty wild considering that he is running 3 drops and 4 drops. Obviously, he does have cards like Dark Ritual, he has some artifact mana, but that is very unusual if you're trying to cast 3 drops and 4 drops. We saw a game yesterday where Mark actually won on turn 1, on top of also playing the One Ring halfway, through his combo. I think it involved triple Dark Ritual. There was a Lotus Petal. I think there was a Doomsday, and Mark was just able to win on turn 1.
Yeah, and interestingly, the One Ring actually enabled that turn 1 win because he waited on the draw with the ring until he created the Doomsday pile and then drew off of that. So yeah, players are now thinking of what they could do. Martin has got Saga active, could make a token, attacking in with the zombie for 2, but Mark is sitting pretty comfortably with a couple of cards in hand, ready to draw for the draw step and 3 more from the One Ring. So build your own ancestral recall that we are to see in the later rounds today.
In the meantime, I was able to find out for you what the 3 oversized cards are. First place does get Force of Will, like we already mentioned a few times. And then there's Wormcoil Engine, Chalice, and Emrakul. You can let us know in the chat which one would you pick. Which one does seem like the most exciting one? In the meantime, Martin plays a Magus of the Moon, a card we have been seeing a lot from the red prison decks, a little bit also sometimes the sideboard of the Death and Dax's deck, but looks like this Ragnos Scam deck kind of has it all. It really tries to attack the opponent from multiple angles, not just the reanimation package, the Scam package. There is a Magus, there's a Saga as well.
Yeah, it makes it pretty tricky for Mark because he has very few ways to get rid of that Magus. He does have Carpet of Flowers, so that's one. Sorry, Prismatic Ending. Now you have to pay 3 colors, but you've got red from the lands because of Magus, blue from the island, and then white from the Lotus Petal. He probably has Swords to Plowshares as well, so there are some ways to get rid of it.
How much does Mark actually care about the Magus, considering that he has cards like Dark Ritual? He already has Lotus Petal in play. The Doomsday piles usually feature cards like Lion's Eye Diamond to cast the Thassa's Oracle. So is that actually that big of a deal for Mark?
So yeah, it's possible that he doesn't really care that much because, as you said, Lotus Petal can be cracked for black to enable the Doomsday. Then some cantrips like Street Wraith or Edge of Autumn can draw him into the pile, draw lead, Lion's Eye Diamond, and then combo from that point. So it's possible he doesn't care. But the question is whether he wants to play the fair game, which seems like it. You know, maybe he's got like Shieldred in hand. He also cannot shuffle cards away from Brainstorm because fetches are off. The good thing for Mark is that Martin self-stone rained that Urza Saga, so there are no constructs coming down.
Yeah, it looks like that Magus is more like an annoying obstacle rather than a card that would completely prevent Mark from being able to combo off. What are the best cards against Doomsday? Like if you expected, your local metagame to have many Doomsday players, how would you approach that matchup? What are some of the best generic hate cards against that deck?
Yeah, so I would think of 2. Flusterstorm is one. It's really difficult for them to prevent that. Although this is maybe why Mark actually brought Veil of Summer to prevent actually this Flusterstorm angle to disrupt you. And also Dress Down that shuts off Thassa's Oracle even when it's played with Cavern of Souls as an uncounterable threat. Mm-hmm. So these would be the 2 cards I would be looking at. One thing to mention is that it seems that all Dark Rituals had been exiled with Surgical Extraction earlier. They are at the side, the bottom of the screen, which makes it much, much tougher for Mark. And I think he will actually have to deal with Magus then.
Yeah, that certainly changes things a lot here. Mark is ready with a Swords to Plowshares. I mean, if you're drawing 3 or 4 cards a turn, thanks to the One Ring, you are going to find some answers eventually. The Lotus Petals helping Mark a lot here with the colored mana. Okay, a different question. If you are a blue player with cards like Force of Will, do you typically fight over the Doomsday? Or do you typically fight over what's going to happen afterwards? Because it certainly does look appealing to leave the opponent with only 5 cards left in their library, especially if you have a counter in your hand, right? How do you typically approach that?
Oh yeah, this is so contextual because like both players have to think about that. Like if you let Doomsday resolve, the Doomsday player knows it resolves, so they might stack their deck so much that Force of Will do nothing. For example, play like at the Cavern of Souls, double Thassa's Oracle, Veil, and just be happy about it, right? And easily beat Force of Will. So with that perspective, you probably should just counter Doomsday and just not give the Doomsday opponent player the ability to stack up their deck the way they want.
All right, well, now it doesn't look like Mark is playing a Doomsday deck at all, just using the fair cards, the Fairy, the One Ring. Martin, in the meantime, makes another 2/2, attacks for 4. So this match between what is technically a reanimated deck against a combo deck actually currently involves a lot of combat with regular 2/2 creatures and the One Ring drawing a lot of cards for Mark. Not what we expected to see.
Well, you can call it just like a limited match where one person had a bomb in their sealed pack. So because basically this is what we see. 3 mana 2/2. Okay, remove your 3 mana 2/2. Get attack with zombies. But Mark has to actually do something about it. So yes, he might have 4 Veils in hand right now and a bajillion other cards, but he has to actually win from this position. And it's not a deck that could, for example, draw the entire deck with just the 1 ring, because he'd die probably along the way. But we could maybe see something like Doomsday. Okay, that's one line. Doomsday, draw a bunch of cards thanks to the 1 ring to draw into the pile, and just play Thassa's Oracle. And that's it. So Dark Ritual might not be that needed. But we only see 1 black.
Martin, in the meantime, has another Magus of the Moon. Mark uses his mana in response to cast a Brainstorm. We did see already that thanks to cards like Lotus Petal, he is able to play around the Magus using the removal spells like Swords to Plowshares to get rid of it. As you mentioned, playing without Dark Rituals, not ideal here, but certainly still Mark with some outs in his deck to try to pull off the combo, even with that Magus in play.
Yeah,
there is a Doomsday in his hand already.
Yeah, there is Lorien revealed to shuffle. There is double Edge of Autumn. There is
Funnily enough, if you look at Mark's mana base right now, he has an island, a tundra, and a tropical island. So 3 lands that do not actually produce black mana. And with the Dark Rituals being exiled, with only that 1 Underground Sea, it might not be that easy to cast that Doomsday.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Mark is facing 6 damage on the other side of the table, so that's 2 attacks. So it's a pretty precarious position for him. This Surgical on Dark Ritual might be, in addition to Magus, might be the nail in the coffin.
All right, mana floating, sacrifice the land to Edge of Autumn.
Hold priority.
Yeah, I think what's happening is Mark is holding the control button on Magic Arena, holding priority. So I'm going to put 1 draw effect on the stack. I'm going to respond to that by cycling Street Wraith with another card draw effect on the stack.
Wow, discarding like 6 cards.
I'm going to crack my Lion Side Diamond. Presumably the top of my library was already stacked with a Brainstorm, so there is a Doomsday, which does not happen to be an accident.
Wow, this is such a sick sequence.
Well, yeah, I guess Martin just realizes, okay, well, even without the Dark Ritual, there is a Doomsday pile you're going to be able to get.
Wow.
That includes another Lion Side Diamond, Thassa's Oracle, and I don't really have any kind of interaction. So Mark wins 2-0, moves on to the semifinals. Congratulations to him.
That was unreal. Watching Mark play this Doomsday deck, it's a masterclass. It's a masterclass. Yeah, he brains.
We didn't catch the start of the game, but I think what very likely ended up happening was that Mark had the 1 ring with the Dark Ritual, which then ended up being exiled. But all the extra cards from the 1 ring just gave Mark too many resources and too many ways to find the answers for the cards like Magus of the Moon that are normally pretty good against the deck, but not if you have Lotus Petal and Swords and you're drawing 4 cards a turn. So congratulations to Mark. I think this concludes the quarterfinal coverage. We're going to take a little bit of a break here, and we're going to be right back with the semifinals in a few minutes. So stay with us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.